Ransomware, what can I say about it? I wrote 2 articles for Enterprise IT News about ransomware recently. And then when I posted it on LinkedIn, I think those people who are in the cybersecurity industry or the insurance industry, they kind of know what it's about. But a majority of people don't know what it is actually.
Welcome to the Security Lab podcast.
A basic explanation would be like it's when threat actors or hackers hold our business information, right? And they kind of like encrypt it so we're not able to use it. So of course, when we can't use it, our business cannot operate and cannot run. So this causes downtime, business downtime, which causes loss of revenue, loss of reputation, and also future loss. So unless we pay the hackers what they ask for, the business will continue to not be able to operate. The usual scenario is after the ransom is paid, then the decryption keys will be released and the business will be able to decrypt the data, and business goes on as usual. So that's a very, very basic explanation of ransomware and an ideal situation whereby the data is decrypted, but it doesn't happen all the time. I think there are 2 kinds of losses when it comes to when ransomware happens. One is the loss from paying the ransom, and it's usually a very huge amount, right? And from what I understand is that the amounts that hackers are demanding these days has increased exponentially from, say, a few years ago. And then another kind of loss would be from costs of notifying customers, the cost of notifying regulators, and also the cost of not being able to do business. So there are, I think, in general, 2 kind of losses that results from ransomware.
I think the way Kat put it is brilliant and pretty much sums up what exactly ransomware is. I mean, if you think about it, ransomware is nothing but just malicious software. The whole idea behind ransomware is that, okay, fine, it will sort of hijack some of your assets or your servers, your folders and things like that, and basically encrypt everything and demand some fee from you. And that's why that's what they kind of consider as ransom, right? I'm holding your files hostage and you need to pay me a certain amount of money to get your resources back. So essentially, this is what ransomware is. At a very basic level, it's malicious software that will hijack a system. It will hold it, or rather, it will encrypt everything and keep it on hold, and say that it will give you your decryption keys to get so that you can recover your data and things like this. In many cases, it does not happen, and that's essentially it.
And from what I understand, I think the word ransomware itself pretty much gives a lot. Basically, you're being held ransom for certain things. And the de facto advice is that you don't pay when you are being held ransom. But from what I know, it's also that ransomware can be indiscriminate as well as being targeted. So what is out there that guides general people as well as businesses on what they can do when they are faced with ransomware? It seems like there is no way you can prepare for it. Or is it always the case where you have to cure it? What actually can be done in order to be prepared for the onset of a ransomware attack, if I may call it?
So to quickly recap on what Kat said, ransomware is actually a malware, a malicious software that encrypts or renders your system useless, denies you access to the data and the files that you kept inside. That's probably, I would say, the first generation ransomware. today, if you see ransomware, it goes beyond just denying access to your data. They even go as far as threatening you to say that if you do not pay me X amount in cryptocurrency or whatever currency that they want, they would release that data to public. Now, this has a two-pronged effect to organizations. Number one, the organizations now are faced with the fact that they have been hit with a cybersecurity incident. So they are required by law in certain kind of organizations where they have to disclose that they've been hit by such an attack. Secondly, you may have confidential or personal information or even information that may be secret, like for example, your trade secrets or your intellectual property that you want to protect from being disclosed to everyone. Example would be in the current times, the cookbook or the recipe for a very effective COVID-19 vaccine. And if that gets out, any country or any organization that has the capability could replicate that. And that would result in costs of millions, if not billions of dollars. So we now have two kinds of instances. One instance is where you don't have access to your information, and the other one is you may get back access to your information, but you also have that threat that that particular information may now come out in the open. So organizations are faced in a conundrum. Bottom line of the whole question is, if I have a ransom, such a ransom, do I pay or do I not pay? I guess that's the question that it alludes to.
But the entire phenomena of being hit by a ransomware is characterized by a lot of uncertainty. In order to decide whether to pay or not to pay, the first thing we should look at is, do we have enough information to help us decide? And what kind of information are we looking at? Do we need to look at technical information, or do we look at historical information? Is there anything at all to guide organizations or even your average user? If today I wake up, I start up my computer, and I am greeted by a screen that tells me something has been locked, then what are the things that I can do?
Well, but in this case, if you think about it, right, but when it comes to the fact that whether we should pay or we should not pay, there's no assurance here, right? If you think about it, even if I do pay, there's no assurance that I will get my data back. So it's always kind of going to be a little bit tricky in this situation.
But before we even try to answer that, the question which I have for the cybersecurity professionals in the room, Doc and Nigel, you've been in this space, right? Have you seen ransomware attacks happening to individuals as well? Have they only been the bane of businesses and organizations, or do you see individuals also suffering from it?
When we look at the past incidences of ransomware, for example, instances of NotPetya, I remember that it was so widespread that it's not just organizations that get hit, but also users who actually get hit. Well, NotPetya, we know that was targeted to a Ukrainian organization, but unfortunately, it spilled over to the general public. So there's no guarantee that a ransomware that hits a particular organization may not spread out. So for example, a ransomware may use a USB thumb drive as a mode of propagation, which means that it writes the code into the USB thumb drive. The unknowing user unplugs it from his infected machine and plugs it into another machine, and now that machine gets infected, which is probably one of the reasons why a lot of large organizations do not allow USB thumb drives to be used in the first place. So to answer the question of whether it's limited to organization, we are very certain it's not. It's definitely propagatable to end users as well. That's for sure.
Yeah. And back to Prof's question, she was asking how can organizations and or individuals be guided when it comes to making a decision on whether to pay the ransom?
I'll answer it in a two-pronged approach. The first one is from a legal standpoint, and the second one is from a business standpoint, because these two sometimes can be very much contradictory, and it depends on the situation. If you go on a legal standpoint, let's use Malaysia for an example. Malaysia has clear laws that one shall not pay ransom. So which means that any act of paying ransom goes against the law. And if you happen to have a cyber insurance policy in Malaysia, for example, you will not be compensated if you pay ransom. So the policy clearly states that thou shall not pay ransom, and if thou pays ransom, the amount paid will not be reimbursed. Now, interestingly, in the topic of paying ransom, I believe one of the governments, if I'm not mistaken, either the US or the UK government have now mandated that any ransom pay is subject to taxation. So here's the problem. You're not only paying ransom, you're also paying tax for the ransom. Because a lot of these notices for ransom demands are often public, which means that you can't hide the fact that you are going to pay ransom. So that's the first thing. Now, let's look at it from a business perspective. So just say in the recent incident of ransomware where an organization that was selling maintenance software called Kaseya or Kasuya, either one of the pronunciations, they have been hit by a group called Reevil. And what happened is this software that they've come up with is now spreading ransomware to all the machines. In fact, in UK, it was reported that over 800 point of sale terminals were infected, and they had to bring down the whole organization and patch the machine one by one. So the guys who ransomed that organization said that we demand a total amount of USD 70 million in Bitcoin, and we will release a general key. So here you're faced with the conundrum. Pay the ransom or don't pay the ransom. If you don't pay the ransom, business gets affected, and there's also the issue of whether they will release the actual keys or not. Now, interestingly, the corporate world also shapes how all these bad guys work. So in order for them to make money, and I'm specifically referring to the ransomware operators, what they do is they actually now keep their track record, whereby they say to all their victims that, look, I've done 20 campaigns before this, so now I'm telling you with utmost certainty that you will get the decryption key. And this is why you should trust me, because 20 campaigns ago, I've proven myself and I've given the right keys. So it's like, is there any honor or non-honor with bad guys? That's kind of the question that we're going to ask. But of course, the first thing is, you pay the bad guys, yeah, you may get your decryption key, but it stops there. Do organizations actually learn how they get the ransomware in the first place? I mean, in this case, we know it's caused by a quote unquote organization that had very outdated software with a SQL injection, which is quite easily exploitable. We also have instances where nation state actors were going after supply chain type of attacks, which is much more complex. I mean, we're talking about the cream of the crop falling for the same kind of attacks, and these are the guys who eat, breathe, sell security on a day-to-day basis. And we are also seeing that ransomware attacks, they don't stop at one time only. Based on a report done by a threat intel organization, they have seen the same organizations being targeted again. So you're not paying ransom once, you're actually paying ransom twice. So in that instance, guess what's happening? You get ransomware once, you pay, you get the decryption key, but you've not really fixed the problem. So what happens? You get ransomware again. Now the guys know that you're going to definitely pay. So most likely if you've paid once, you are going to pay again. So guess what happens? You are actually giving the bad guys more motivation for them to continue these kind of attacks. So back to the decision of whether legally you should do or from a business standpoint, some businesses unfortunately don't have a choice. Business comes to a grinding halt. They don't have access to their information. They cannot continue business. So it's really at that point of time, the business may have to sit down and evaluate what is the most effective way for them to resume business. Because at the end of the day, it's just a matter of you either being able to get your system up front, get it up and running, get all your data and continue business and start doing something to make a difference. But maybe that's not the right approach.
Doc and Nigel, like Doc, you mentioned that it's actually illegal to pay ransomware in Malaysia, right? But have you seen instances of like businesses actually having to pay anyway because, like as you put it, businesses came to a grinding halt and it was causing them lots of revenue? Did you see any instance of this happening in Malaysia, and they were let off the hook by law?
Enjoying the show so far? Subscribe now so that you don't miss out on the latest episode. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. Visit podcast.securitylaw.asia to get the links to subscribe.
Personally, I haven't seen anyone pay the ransomware. I haven't heard of anyone. And I think it's a little tricky situation, just like Doc mentioned, right? Paying ransom is not legal in Malaysia. So even if someone did pay a ransom, they're not going to admit to that. It kind of put them in a very tricky situation. So no, to answer your question, I haven't heard anyone who has actually paid a ransom. And whether they have received or recovered any data from anything that has happened, I haven't heard of anything of such.
Nigel is spot on. The issue stems because, number one, no one is obliged to inform anyone to say that they've gone through a cybersecurity incident. I mean, I'm going to say cybersecurity incident in general because ransomware is just part of it. In the US, under SEC, you are mandated and required to disclose publicly on what's happening as long as you're publicly listed company. In Malaysia and in Asia generally, there is no such requirement. You probably would have heard newses, you probably would have heard rumors. I have seen a number of organizations going through this. Whether they have paid or not, it's probably a decision at a very senior level, maybe even at a board of director level, in order for them to sanction such a payment, because number one, it's definitely above the CEO's limits of authority, how much he can sign off on a check, right? So these kind of amounts may be something that at a very senior level have to be a decision made, whether it's minuted or it's not minuted, whether it's sanctioned as a payment or it's sanctioned as a data recovery exercise. It depends on the organization. That's how most organizations work. Like, I really like Prof's question where, how are we guided with the decision? Or do we pay, do we not pay? End of the day, it's on business, right? They decide whether they want to pay, get access to the data. I mean, with the caveats that you may or may not get the actual key. That's why ransomware groups now come up with their own reputation list to say that, hey, you can trust me. But again, it really depends on how the organization takes it. And there is no clear way. I do not strongly say don't pay or pay, because a lot of organizations may be snookered to a corner where they are forced to pay, not because they want to, because that's the only way for them to continue business. If you decide to take the hard and right approach and say, I'm not going to pay the ransom and we'll do what we need to do, then your backup has to work. You need to make sure you'll be able to bring your business back into a runnable state and ensure that whatever got the ransomware into your organization, that loophole or any other associated loopholes are patched, blocked, cemented. Do whatever you need to do to make sure that doesn't happen. Unfortunately, what we see today is a lot of organizations look at the symptoms, not the root cause. Ransomware is merely a symptom. You probably have an underlying root cause which you may not have seen, but it's something important to remember when you're doing a forensic analysis or you're probably doing a forensic report when it comes to ransomware.
Okay. For me, at least, like when I'm reporting for Enterprise IT News, when I write about ransomware, I somehow another topic has to come up as well, which is cyber insurance. Those two kind of like go hand in hand, and you have to admit that recently in the news that those two have appeared in the news together a lot. Cyber insurance, but in Malaysia, what's the education and awareness for cyber insurance? Do businesses know they have this option? Do enough businesses know they have the cyber insurance option, and are they able to apply it?
I can share with certainty that cyber insurance, at least from a public listed company perspective, is something that everyone is looking at. The only challenge is that the policy makes it clear, at least in Malaysia, from what I've seen in my past working experience, is that they specifically say that they do not cover ransomware. No ransom payment is covered in Malaysia, or at least in most parts of Asia. That situation is completely different in other parts of the world. That much I can tell you.
Wow, that is news to me and very revealing. Thank you for sharing that, Doc.
But there's always a workaround, right? You can always get cyber insurance from a different country. For instance, you can take cyber insurance from a provider who's based in US or someone who's based in Australia, and then you can always claim for ransomware as long as it is covered in there, though. So yes, there are workarounds, I guess.
Now, why would you want to take cyber insurance for ransomware? That's where the money is. And then isn't that something that attracts attention?
I remember an incident where a cyber insurance provider was ransomed and hacked. And as a result, the guys got the list of all of their customers, started going after their customers because they know that the cyber insurance provider are covering them. So that was a very interesting racket that happened not too long ago. I think under 12 months, I've seen a few cyber insurance providers getting hit, and for the sole reason of getting their customer list and using that customer list, going after the customers, because knowing very well that if their customer gets ransom, the ransom will be paid.
So I did have something on my mind, which is when you look at ransomware from another perspective. And that is, if you think about it, or you look at different reports that have been coming out, right? 2020, there was the Interpol report, which highlights ransomware as one of the top threats for businesses. In fact, not just Interpol report. If you pick up any other reports, you will always see, or pretty much see, ransomware in the top 10 there. So this kind of drove me to thinking about why ransomware is so prevalent, right? What actually what is the motivation for someone to have a ransomware to begin with? And then when I started looking at the numbers, you see that there are different services out there when it comes to ransomware. So for instance, you can subscribe to a service, sort of lease a ransomware from someone. So I pay a ransomware provider, say as an example, $500, and I send I send a malware to a few thousand users. There is a possibility that I can get a good return on my investment. That means if I'm spending $100,000, I can definitely get at least $10,000 in returns. So I think from a business point of view, this for the bad guys is definitely a good thing to have, which kind of is a tricky situation then, because if it is so cheap for someone to get into this business, because the barrier to entry for a business like this is quite low, then it's going to make it very difficult for businesses or legitimate businesses to cope up with it, because you keep receiving a lot of malware and you just have to keep fighting it, which is kind of difficult, I think.
Wow. So what I'm hearing, Doc, you're saying that the hackers are being very targeted when it comes to like picking their victims, and they know where to go to know who to target and who to ransom. And Nigel is saying ransomware is a service now, and it's become like kind of commoditized, and returns are also kind of guaranteed in some cases, I suppose.
Well, it's not really guaranteed, but there is a good possibility, right? So there's always going to be a probability. Out of 1,000 users, maybe one will click on that link, one gets infected. If I get, instead of 1,000 users, maybe I send 10,000, that means it increases the number of users to tenfold. If I charge each user, say $500, that's like $5,000, right? I mean, it's just it's a numbers game, I guess.
I think we are left with a lot of ends or rather areas where we need to look deeper into. On the one hand, from what was shared, I can see that the payment itself is fueling the growth of ransomware, encouraging it, if I may. But on the other hand, the actual pay rate is not known or maybe even underreported. So the question I have is, if let's say will the payment rate increase or decrease if there is more awareness on ransomware, and if the victims are made aware of what's happening and they are equipped with a way to prevent it, would that actually address the situation? Because number one, we have to look at every organization from a business perspective. What is their perceived susceptibility to a ransomware attack, and what are the risks? And then on the other hand, we need to look at their own efficacy and how well are they prepared to deal with one. In this case, we have instances where many organizations put in measures, security measures that were supposed to enhance and protect their assets. But however, based on the recent reporting that we have, they themselves became one possible vulnerability to be exploited. So the question then is, when an organization report their own security measures, can that be a factor to help them predict how vulnerable they are to a ransomware attack?
We've seen trends currently that the attackers are trying very innovative and different ways of getting into the machine. I'll quote two examples. First one was Hafnium, or the Microsoft Exchange remote code execution vulnerability, and the second one was the recent Kaseya ransomware hit. In both of these instances, what happened is that as part of software development, both Microsoft Exchange software as well as the Kaseya software recommended that their respective folders be excluded from an antivirus scan for whatever reason that they have. As a result, this particular exclusion was then used as a benefit or an opportunity for the bad guys to download their malware and run it from these folders, which are exempt from their detection suite response softwares or their endpoint protection softwares. So as a result, you're talking about the whole system that's being protected, which follows all the good rules that you're supposed to follow. But at the same time, you put all these tweaks and all these minor little bits and bobs and settings that exclude some of these things, which later becomes a launch pad into attacks. Security and attacks constantly evolve. You can never say that I'm doing whatever I can today and it is secure. So let me give you an example. This probably touches on a more sore topic, but it's something that's relevant to ransomware. People equate compliance to security. Example, PCI DSS. So they say, yeah, I'm following this framework. It's perfect and I meet all the requirements. I'll give you an example. In PCI DSS, 7-character passwords are deemed secure. Now, most of you will probably fall off your chair listening to this. And you know definitely even 8 characters is not good enough. But yet, if you follow from a compliance perspective, I meet the compliance. The compliance says I have to do ABC. I have done ABC. Your auditors can come and check, and here I am. So, of course, a debate for another day would be, does compliance equate to security? And do organizations that follows very heavily on compliance frameworks are truly secure? Which probably alludes to what Prof was saying earlier about how I'm doing all these things. Am I secure? Because if you ask me, security is not an endpoint, it's a journey. We are learning what the bad guys are trying to do. The bad guys are learning what the good guys are doing to protect their system. And we're seeing this as a constant battlefield. You're doing something today, and if you say, yeah, I've done enough, I spent X amount of US dollars in building all these things, but at the end of the day, it's a constant struggle. You have to reinvent how you secure your infrastructure, how you secure your systems in order for you to stay relevant.
So after all of that, what is a true test of security? An impossible question to answer.
Well, I would say we have a saying: when you advance 1 foot, then the adversary gains 10 feet, and it goes on and on.
I love that question because I've been asked that question by board of directors. They say, oh, okay, so we've spent this much. Are we now secure? Well, yes and no. And they usually don't like that answer. Reality of the situation is, it's just like having a car. You go to a showroom, you pick a brand new car, it's nice, it drives well, and it doesn't stop there. Yeah, you pay your monthly dues to the bank because you're taking a loan, a hire purchase. You still have to maintain the car. You have to change the engine oil. You have to do a lot of things. Some parts have wear and tear. Things change. And then maybe at some point of time, you may say, this is already outdated. I want a brand new car. And some people say, no, I like old cars. And I will labor my passion in maintaining and making sure it runs. So if I equate the same thing into systems and technology, it applies. You cannot run away from saying that if you have a piece of technology, you have to maintain it. You have to take care of it. And technology, as we know, is not perpetual. Very recently, they announced Windows 11 to everybody's surprise because Microsoft said there will not be another Windows at all after Windows 10. Surprise, surprise. I fell off my chair after listening to that announcement. And I'm like, okay, so that means there's going to be a Windows 20, Windows 50, Windows 100, and 2024. God knows how many versions of Windows are going to be. At least I hope doesn't exceed 100 in my lifetime. But reality of the situation, that's going to happen. And interestingly, I'm tying back to that announcement on Windows 11 is that Microsoft has said that it will only run on the newer generation Intel AMD chipsets. It requires a TPM 2.0. I mean, we can go into a lengthy discussion into how the specifications, in order for you to run Windows 11, requires you to have an updated machine. So I was very sore because I had a NUC running Windows 10 perfectly fine. The only problem was that it was running an outdated i3 chipset, which was about 6 years old, and I can't upgrade it. Which means if I want the latest and the greatest and has all the security patches in there, I now have to change my NUC, which I'm running on right now. Which is kind of sore because I think it still runs well as 16 gig and it has enough computing power to last me another 1 or 2 versions of Windows, but that's the reality of the situation.
Okay, my new laptop is i3 and it's like it's very slow. But anyway, so maybe to wrap up ransomware, but Doc, you actually brought up a few topics within this ransomware topic, and maybe those topics which you brought up and you suggested can be topics for another day. But for now, to wrap ransomware up, if Nigel and Prof have no Nothing else to add. Just to be very clear, because I myself also am very, very curious. I'm a frequent user of technology. I use technology a lot. I use a lot of technology a lot. So I would be very curious how to protect myself and my devices from ransomware.
Kat, you brought a damn good topic. Ransomware for devices. I mean, imagine if you get your mobile phone or your Apple Watch ransomware. Wow. That's an interesting topic. Seriously. You really opened a huge can of worms, my friend.
So the best protection is to not use it lah. Is that it?
I'd love to see someone ransom my watch, which is not connected and runs off solar and battery. So good luck trying to get me timeless.
Okay, but as an individual user or consumer, how do I protect my computer systems, from ransomware? Like basic hygiene, is that enough?
Basic hygiene will help you solve 80% of most of the security issues. You still have 20% which you may still get into trouble because someone find a way to bypass the 80% protection that you put. We can secure as much as we could. The question is, what happens if something bad happens? So for example, keep backups of your machine or your data or your software, but backups have one problem. Today you back up a file and you constantly have backups of your file. You need to have enough journaling of your backup so that if the ransomware attacks your system and poor timing backup happens and it now saves a copy of that ransom file in your backup, you have a problem. But that requires you to be able to go back to different versions of your file. Then at least we now have a version of your document or whatever that you need to recover in a usable state. You lose 1 or 2 days of editing, but at least you have a workable version. So backup is good, and in fact, backup is the way to resolve ransomware issue, but do understand that even backups can be ransomed. So if your backups get ransomed, you need to be able to find a way to recover that. So journaling is one way to make sure that you can go back 2-3 versions before so that you can get a properly usable copy of your file.
Thanks for joining us this week on Security Lab. Make sure to visit our website at securitylab.asia, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show.